This is a story of ocean voyages. Voyages made from Europe across the Atlantic. And it is a story of some of the men who made the voyages. The French, English, and Dutch explorers in the Age of Discovery. In the race to find a water route to Asia, the French, English, and Dutch explorers were following the Portuguese and Spaniards who had gone before them. The Portuguese explorer Dias, in 1488, tried to reach India by sailing eastward. Columbus tried to reach Asia by sailing westward. These explorations and others that followed were supported by national monarchs. Merchants and bankers, too, were willing to risk their money in explorations in return for a share of wealth that might be found. Who would be the first to reach the riches of Asia? In 1493, word came to England that Columbus had found the Indies. The news reached the town of Bristol, and in this historic English port, we begin the English chapter of the story of exploration. This tower overlooking the town commemorates the discovery of America by John Cabot and his son Sebastian. Was Cabot the discoverer of America? As a young man, Cabot, an Italian, had traveled in the Near East, seeing caravans carrying the valuable products of the Orient. Perhaps he wondered if these goods could be brought to Europe by sea. Later, in Bristol, Cabot may have talked to other sea captains, talked about sailing westward as Columbus had done to find a route to Asia. Cabot obtained backing from merchants and from King Henry VII. The English monarch gave to Cabot a commission to sail on a voyage of discovery. In the same year that da Gama rounded Africa, Cabot sailed westward from Bristol and sighted lands now known as Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. He didn't know this was the North American continent. In the following year, 1498, Cabot made another voyage to the same region. He was the first to touch this continent, the discoverer of America. In the race for routes to Asia, Spain and Portugal jealously guarded the southeast passage around Africa and the southwest passage around America. But perhaps there was a way through the land Cabot had found. Thus was born the dream of the Northwest Passage, through America to Asia. Now, after Cabot, the story of discovery shifts to France. The year is 1524, and in the palace of the French king sits a shrewd monarch, Francis I. Interested in the possible wealth from new lands, King Francis decided to send an explorer to the New World. The captain's name was Verrazzano, a native of Florence, Italy. Verrazzano was commissioned in 1524, and he sailed from this harbor town of Dieppe in France. Once again, a westward voyage of discovery. Verrazzano sighted land along what is now the Carolina coast. He found no passage, but he did find the river later named the Hudson. Then he continued to Newfoundland, already known, and then he returned. Back in France, Verrazzano wrote the first description of the northeast coast of America. 10 years later, from this harbor of Saint-Malo in France, another captain sailed. He was Jacques Cartier, another in the long list of daring men who sought the Northwest Passage. The route to Newfoundland was well known by now. Cartier explored the Gulf he later named St. Lawrence. He found no Northwest Passage, but he did land, and he laid formal claim to the region for France. Cartier also talked with Indians of the region, who told him of an endless river. An endless river? Was this the Northwest Passage through the continent? Cartier was ordered to make a second voyage. This time he sailed 1,000 miles up the great St. Lawrence River. But the river, like the Gulf, was not the Northwest Passage. Yet Cartier's explorations opened the way for a new France, the start of a French empire in America. Now others would take up the dream of the Northwest Passage, men such as Martin Frobisher of England. 3 times he tried to sail around the top of the North American continent. Each time, ice and storms of the northern seas turned him back. In the northern lands, Frobisher found the people we know as Eskimos. They seemed oriental to him. Was this then the northern part of Asia? On the northern bay, which he thought was the Northwest Passage, Frobisher left his name, not realizing he had tried to penetrate a land mass wider than Europe. Another Englishman, Sir Francis Drake, was the first to give the world an idea of the extent of America. Drake, like most English and Dutch explorers, was financed by means of a joint stock company. Here, merchants, bankers, and even royalty pledged sums of money for overseas enterprises. On such an enterprise, Francis Drake sailed in his ship, the Pelican. The voyage began in 1577. From England, Drake sailed southward across the Atlantic, through the Strait of Magellan. He plundered Spanish ships along the coast of South America. Laden with booty, he continued northward as far as what is now Puget Sound. He was looking for the western end of a Northwest Passage, through which he might return home. Finding none, Drake repaired his ships at this bay in California, still called Drake's Bay. From here, fearing the aroused Spaniards to the south, Drake sailed across the Pacific through the East Indies. Then he followed the well-known Southeast Passage around Africa and back to England, a voyage around the world. On his return, Queen Elizabeth knighted Drake aboard his ship. Drake's search for a western end of a Northwest Passage, at the same time that Frobisher searched for the eastern end, at last helped men realize how vast America was. Here was a huge continent, not only to explore, but to colonize. At Roanoke Island in 1585, the first attempt was made to plant an English colony. The colonizer was Sir Walter Raleigh. Although his settlement failed, another event strengthened English activity overseas. Once again, Sir Francis Drake showed the world superb seamanship. Drake led the fleet that destroyed the Spanish Armada in 1588. With this great English victory, Spain's power declined, and the ships of a new nation, Holland, began to take a more active role in overseas exploration and commerce. In his famous ship, the Half Moon, an English navigator sailed for the Dutch. He was Henry Hudson. Exploring the east coast of America, as Verrazzano had done, he entered this river. It now bears his name, the Hudson River, but it was not the Northwest Passage. Later, on another voyage, Hudson sailed into the great bay that also bears his name, Hudson Bay. Was this the passage? Hudson met only ice-locked waters. His discontented crew mutinied, leaving Hudson and some of his followers to die in an open boat. Others might still search for the Northwest Passage, but now interest was shifting from exploring to colonizing. Men were writing glowing reports of the new lands, such as Virginia. And gradually, men began to think of America not as an obstacle in the passage to Asia, but rather as America, a whole new world, where people from England, France, and the Netherlands could build a new England, a new France, and a new Netherland. And these achievements were made possible by daring men. Cabot, Verrazzano, Cartier, Frobisher, Drake, Raleigh, and many others. explorers who lived in this exciting age of discovery.